So today I'm going to talk about choices. Is your life your own? Um, this started with a discussion on the philosophers um, Facebook site where somebody put up a thing of saying your life is completely your own responsibility. Everything that's happened to you or that you've done is because of your decisions and going forward. And I was like, and I really agreed with somebody who said it pretty rudely, but well, I'll be sure to tell that to the millions of people starving right now, because the idea that we're completely in control of our life is, to me, ridiculous. It depends on where you're born, who your parents are, how the external circumstances of your parents' life are. What do they know about being parents? Do they have the time and the energy to be parents? And do they have the education to be good parents? And this brings up a little thing I learned. Was one of my final classes in my master's degree was family counseling, and the author said something I completely disagreed with, which was um, Americans really need to change the way we parent to not being abusing our children, meaning that our what we think is good parenting is actually child abuse. And by that, he meant, I believe, well, I mean, that we don't have any understanding of how to be truly present for children. And I was just talking to a friend of mine who does teaching. We don't care about children in America. And of course, there's going to be a lot of pushback to that. And I think, what is care? Care is, in America, care is money. And we don't respect teachers, meaning we don't pay them. We respect Jeff Bezos. We respect superb physical athletes. We respect Bill Gates. We do not respect teachers. And we can have an argument about that. And I'll say, okay, pay them more. And be like, oh, we can't afford that. Well, what can't you afford? You can't afford things you don't care about. So, and we have this idea. Well, Joe Rogan and one of his cohort was making fun of Pete Buttigieg for taking time off to be a true parent to his new child. And that, well, Americans don't do that. We're men here. We go out and we fight and we make money. And it's like, yep, we don't care about children here. We care about fighting and making money. And so back to what are your choices? And there's a lot of scientific evidence showing that our brain patterns are set in that first 7 years. Well, you can call it 8 years, as the Chinese. Your first birthday is the day you're born because there's gestation and all that. So by the time you're 8, your neural pathways are pretty set in how you think of yourself in the world and how you interact with the world, unless you get a coach, as in a psychologist or a life coach or a mentor, who helps you make conscious efforts to change these neural pathways about abandonment and violence being the answer and shut up and listen. And it's a cool thing for me because I always think about how we tell children, you do not make any decisions until you're 18, and then you vote, and then you go to the army, and then you drive, and then you got to become a good citizen in a democracy and be a free thinker. And everything in life is about fitness. So if you haven't been allowed to be a free thinker till you're 18, you don't know how to be a free thinker. It's been beaten out of you, and literally for a lot of Americans. Um, and so back to what are your choices in life? You have all these neural pathways that are set by the time you're 7. You have circumstances, and I'm thinking that if you were born into a healthy community with healthy, and you have healthy parents, and you have a healthy school system, and you have relative prosperity in the area that you grew up in, by the time you get to 20, 21, 22, you are able to make decisions about your life that will have material effect on it. Make it, you have better romantic partners, you'll have better financial aspects, you'll be able to have a comfortable life in terms of emotional stability and in terms of housing, access to food, and so on. If you don't have those advantages, you will have your choices limited. And there's a and I use Steele Blackburn's idea: mental and physical health are the same. So here you are saying all your choices are yours. So if you grow up in a community that nobody does physical activity, everybody eats what we call bad food, right? Fatty foods, McDonald's. I shouldn't use McDonald's, but breads, cheeses, stays away from fruits and vegetables and lean beef and fish and everything, just eats. So there, everybody's overweight and nobody exercises. At 21, that's who you are. And you can't just go out and run. And if you decide, well, I'm going to start running a marathon, from that point, it'll probably take you 10 years to be able to run a marathon if you make a decision every day against all your community standards, against your parents, your siblings, your cousins, and your community, in order to eventually be able to run a marathon in 10 years. A very little reward in the time in between. So it's the same with emotional or mental work. If you grow up in a family and or community that doesn't do appropriate emotional work, you have no fitness and it will hurt. So if you decide to become emotionally fit as a not reactive, being able to think about a situation and make the least bad choice if it's a bad situation and make the best choice if it's a good situation, move forward, have those daily habits of focusing on being emotionally present for people in your life that you choose, and be able to choose people who are appropriate, people who are not cruel, who are not very inconsistent, who don't abuse and use you or abandon you or tell you're a bad person and all that. So, and you're going to get dragged back into your old habits very easily because those are the physiological and neurological pathways. And I separate them a little bit because your whole body hurts if you're sitting on the couch for your first 18 years, either metaphorically, emotionally, or spiritually, intellectually, or physically, either weightlifting or walking or running. It's going to hurt every time you try to change those habits. It's going to feel like physical pain and it's going to make you not want to do it. So this is the crux of this whole, and I would say it's either lucky people or entitled people who claim, well, it's all your fault if you don't have a great life. It's like, well, and what does the old say? No man is an island. It is not true. Every activity, especially those first 7 years, really this first 7 years, unless you have help and daily decision, they form your life. You really don't have a choice unless you really fight it and get out. And what do we do about that? How do we then? So if we accept my praesis that you don't have that many choices, how do we as a society deal with people who have maladaptive behaviors, especially towards society, right? If spiritually greed is a sin and you're going to go to hell after you die or have bad karma or come back as an oppressed person or animal because of that, well, that's a maladaptive behavior, but we don't consider greed maladaptive in America. The dominant paradigm is that greed is good. Um, the minority paradigm that greed is not good is denigrated and made fun of and laughed at. Oh, you right? And then there's people like Jordan Peterson who say, you're not a good person if you don't harm people. You're only a good person if you've trained yourself to harm people and then you don't. And it's, what is that? What do you mean? What if you just train yourself not to harm people? Then that makes you weak and powerless. And that's the American paradigm, which then, of course, if you've trained yourself to be violent, you have a mindset that violence solves problems. And it is true that, and then if you have a whole group of people who think violence solves problems, then you're going to have violence. And if you think violence doesn't solve problems, you're going to be looked at askance. What's wrong with you? Why do you think violence doesn't solve problems? It's the only way to solve problems because look, every time there's a problem, we have violence and something happens different. And right. However, we still have violence. Now, violence to me is a problem. And to them, violence is a solution. And then people saying, well, you make your choices. Well, did you choose to think of violence as a solution? Or do you actually have a choice? Do you sit back and think, wow, I wonder if in that situation, people had been able to think about themselves, about their community, and about the future, would they have committed violence on each other? And it, um, think about that. And then we have these confirmation bias. Well, you know what? If it hadn't been for World War II, we never would have discovered penicillin. Really? You really think that all these innovations only come out of trauma and drama? So then there's an addiction. And so we talk about addiction. That's a choice. Everybody, that's a choice. That's a choice. Really? And they go so far with your life as a choice. Oh, if you have cancer, you chose it by being either weak or needing a lesson or being immoral. Those are the three choices you have if you have cancer. There's nothing in that mindset about stuff happens. I was going to use the other word. Probably I will in the future, but stuff happens. You know, the war in Ukraine, all those people that live in Ukraine, well, they made a choice, right? And a friend of mine's all, well, they should stay. You should fight for your country and die. And I'm like, really? You're going to go there with that anybody who's leaving the Ukraine right now is making a poor choice. Our lives aren't our choice. And I've had people say, well, I didn't choose to be violated. I'm like, yeah, you didn't. Um, and part of what happens with people who are repeatedly violated is that they were violated as infants by trusted caregivers, and then that breaks down their ability to perceive um, red flag behavior in other people. So then they get into situations where that's going to happen again and again, and then people blame them instead of saying, wow, this neural pathway was broken of being able to judge people's behavior in a reasonable and thoughtful way and go, oh, I don't want to be around this type of behavior where I don't have people with me to help protect me. And so it becomes, again, is that a choice? I don't think it is. That and being born into an abusive family is not a choice. And born into a community that thinks the way you treat kids is by beating them, telling them to never talk back, to always be obedient, to never think, and then telling them, how do you deal with other people who oppress you? You beat them. And the only way to stop any of this behavior is by being stronger than the other person. And then it gets back to this very immature idea that might makes right. And this is the thing that pretty much everybody who we believe is advanced morally and spiritually says might does not make right. There are moral imperatives. And it's very tricky because in a world that believes might makes right, how does a person who believes morality is more important than might deal with injustice, right? Because there are some people who just say, who will not respond to any call to morality or empathy. They will only respond to, if you do that, you will have greater harm than good done to you. And that's the only thing to respond to. And that's what you have to decide about. How important is this physical existence, right? So if you're a Christian, a lot of Christians are like, well, I protect my family. And I'm like, if your family gets killed, they're all going to heaven. So what is the deal with protecting them from all physical harm on this plane, which is kind of not exactly a punishment if you're Christian, but some sort of not good enough life. So you get rewarded for acting a certain way in this life by going to a better place. And you get punished by not acting in a certain way by going to a worse life. Um, and back to do we have complete free will at all times? And you can get to the binary idea, which is either or, right? Either you have complete free will or you have zero free will. So why worry? But if you're worrying, it's because you were made that way by your creator or whatever. There's no free will. So you have a nuanced issue of that. Sometimes you have free will, sometimes you don't. In some situations, you have free will, and so forth and so on. So my way of looking at it is the better the circumstances you were born into and stayed in, the more free will you have, including your genetics, right? And there's people who are rich and famous and say, well, I just am a better human being than you, and that's why you're poor and I'm not. And one of the excuse me, one of the biggest things people do is I how do you say, I just worked harder than you, and that's why I'm famous, and that's why you're poor and not famous. And there's a book, Freakonomics, the guy that wrote Freakonomics has a book about opportunity, right? And talking about how the billionaires of the tech era, which is I'm going to say the 70s, right? Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, that group. And there's a lot of quiet ones that we never hear about. Were in the right place at the right time, and they all came from privilege. And here's one of the canards we love in America is the self-made man. Oh yeah, Bill Gates, both his parents were well off. He got a $250,000 loan, and then he saw a business opportunity and he jumped on it. And it's like, yeah. And he had all this great education, either at home, in his community, and at school. And so if you grew up in the in poverty, you're not going to have those opportunities. You're not going to be able to do that. Now, it is so true in a country of wealth like most of Europe, the US, Canada, other countries. If you can break through these behavior patterns that are set upon you by your community, there is generally an opportunity, especially if you don't fight against injustice. If you start fighting against injustice, you better do it perfectly, because if not, you're going to get labeled and never be able to get a job or anything. And there is this issue in the US where if I'm an employer, I have a right to mistreat you. And it's not mistreating because I have more power. It's just me treating you as a person in power would naturally treat a person as a less than, right? You don't have any choice in your vacation. I'm not going to let you work more than 33 hours because the government is forcing me to pay for your health care if I do that. And I don't care enough about you to sacrifice some of my money for you to have health care. And it's a great thing with this. So if you fight against that, you are not going to go up in a corporation or any business, really. You're going to be isolated. So there's a degree of acceptance of the greater paradigm, the dominant paradigm. There's a degree of somebody probably came along who helped you change your behavior patterns. I don't think we'll see anybody who just comes out of nowhere with no good role models and be successful. It's funny because I'm a big fan of this guy, LeBron James, as a basketball player. When you look at him, you don't hear about great role models. His father wasn't present. You don't hear about a coach that took him under his wing. You don't hear about a stepdad or a father. And his mom got arrested several years ago for an alcoholic outburst. And it's like, wow, how did this person become who he is without any of what I would consider the absolutely necessary support? So it'd be very interesting to hear his philosophy on that. And I wonder, I'm going to look up, see if he's written any books or anything on that part of life. How do you become successful in this culture? And the more successful he's become, the more he's tried to deal with making a society equitable. And that's a whole nother subject I'll talk about later, is what is equity? Um, there's several things. I will stop with that because that's a whole talk. Do we have choice in our lives? Yes and no. And 99% of it depends upon circumstance. The better your circumstance with guidance, as well as um, access to information and a stable living environment, the more choices you have. And it includes genetics. Some people are more resilient inherently, so they can come out of a worse circumstance and look out and see the behaviors that'll give them access to food, shelter, uh, finances, relationships, healthy relationships with people. And some other people in that same circumstance won't be able to. And of course, then we go back to, well, they chose not to. Really? Really? And it's funny because they were like, well, you can be Michael Jordan if you work as hard as him. And I look at myself in the mirror and I'm like, no, it doesn't matter how hard I had worked. I would never be Michael Jordan. And when I was in high school, I was very good in a very small pool. Like, I wouldn't even say a big fish in a little pond. I was a fish in a tiny pond. And my coach and I looked at, oh, let's think about being a professional runner. And it didn't add up. And so I didn't do it. And I'm always curious about that, because it seems like even in retrospect, like, yeah, all the measurements added up to, you will, no matter what you do every day for the next 20 years, you will never be fast enough to be at that level where you get paid in this event. And athletics is a lot like art. You don't make money at it unless you're in the top 0.1% of that degree. So there's talent, there's situation, there's genetic resilience, there's trained resilience through role models, all give you either an opportunity to have resilience or not have resilience, to have success or not have success in the paradigm of that society. And one thing we need to remember is some societies really, even more than America, only value greed and violence. And and that's another subject that I will talk about, where America is filled with greed and violence, and then people who are here and insulated from the rest of the world think, oh, America is the worst country in the world. And I'm a man, look at the history of Europe. Look what's going on in Africa. Look at what Russia and the Ukraine are doing. And it's funny because I put it that way, Russia and the Ukraine are doing, because America is like, oh, well, we went to Afghanistan pure of heart. Really? No, I don't think so. We went to Iraq pure of heart. No, I don't think so. Either huge ignorance or greed, or some people with greed and other people with ignorance thought those were good things to do and they weren't. So what's the point of, oh, America is not the worst country in the world. That's the conclusion of that, that the dominant paradigms in America have a lot of care for community and others that a lot of idealists who are insulated from the rest of the world don't see, because they only see the part that values greed and violence, which they're all there. And some people, individuals, have that same issue of being divided on when they think it's good to care and when they think it's good to be greedy, and when there's a necessity for violence and when there's a necessity for cooperation. Okay, that seems like enough.